Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. We are here on a Friday again, Erev Shabbos Nachmu. We both went through a Tisha B'Av, hopefully provided us with some inspiration, thinking about Yerushalayim. And the first thing I have an opportunity to do is speak to a Yid located in Eretz Yisrael right before Shabbos Nachmu for him. I already took a haircut. Rabbi Brut actually still has his beard, and the feedback that we've gotten on Rabbi Brut's beard is very, very important. The feedback was that Rabbi Brut is in Eretz Yisrael, and somebody said it's hard for him to watch the videos with Rabbi Brut clean shaven in Eretz Yisrael. So at least for this video, he kept on his beard. Okay, now let's get down to the serious business. This episode is going to be about Seforim that were written throughout the generations on Hilchos Gittin. We did an episode when we started the Masechtas Gittin, on Rishonim and Achronim, but this is a special shir focused on Seforim that were written about the halachas of Gittin and some of the stories behind them. What was the cause and the impetus for these Seforim to be written? This episode is sponsored anonymously. Thank you. I've gotten feedback from around the globe that the word is anonymous, not anonymous. So this episode is sponsored anonymously as a schos for a shidduch for Mordechai Ben Bracha. Rabbi Brut asked me also, he's gotten feedback that the correct way to pronounce the sefer he spoke about at the end of last episode is Siach Tzvi, not Sich Tzvi. So now that we got those dikdukim out of the way, we can begin the episode. And Rabbi Brut's going to fill us in on some of these Seforim, and at the end, he's going to have another surprise sefer to talk about. Rabbi Brut, how are you on this Erev Shabbos Nachmu?
Baruch Hashem.
Okay, so some people are preparing for Shabbos Nachmu, or they have in mind the concert, how they're going to spend their Motzah Shabbos. We're here, Erev Shabbos, to talk about Seforim. And again, this episode should be a schos for a shidduch for Mordechai Ben Bracha. And I hope to stay riveted to all the content and information you're going to be sharing over the next 40 to 45 minutes.
Okay, so let's try to keep it to this time frame. Okay, like this. As we know, when you're learning Gittin, so Daf Yomi is deep into the Masechta already. So we see this Masechta, it's full of, a lot of it is actually involved with all types of scenarios of Gittin. What I mean to say is, if you compare, let's say, to Masechta's Ksuvos, it's known as Shas Katan. It goes off on tangents and all different inyanim, and that's why it's called Shas Katan. Gittin, although it does have its tangents where it goes off to like the rest of Shas, but there's plenty statistically relating to Gittin. So there's an area of Gittin, which is the halachas. We spoke about the Rishonim and the Achronim, the standard Seforim, and we mentioned that it was a very learned Masechta. It was part of the yeshiva cycle, but I want to explore more the special literature of these halachas of Gittin, because a lot of these Seforim are only found in the Hilchos Gittin by these Mechavrim. We only know about them for Hilchos Gittin. And there's a lot of interesting stories relating to them. Now, I actually started working on this a little bit a few years back when I was working on Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis at Mechon Adhena, thanks to Professor Moshe Kahana and others. And basically, we're going to see that Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis, he wrote one of the most classical works on Hilchos Gittin, and we're going to discuss that, and through that we'll actually get to see more b'chlal what's going on over here. Now, in general, the sources, they're in 1893, a bibliography was written by Aaron Yelnek, where he listed almost 100 works that are strictly relating to Hilchos Gittin. And we're going to see Hilchos Gittin means as follows. Hilchos Gittin means straight up the halachas. And the second literature, which some of the Seforim only deal with, that is how to spell the names of the cities, of the women and the men that you write in the get. So there's sort of two types of literature in Hilchos Gittin. Okay, fine. Now, more recently, there has been 2 published articles from Rabbi Kreuzer in the new journal called Mechilta, volumes 2 and 4, which is based on his master's written in Tel Aviv University, which there has much more material. But and Amir Hashem, today I'm going to add different things, and also some of the things was helped from inspiration from this friend of mine.
I think this is the first place someone's going to hear a name Kreuzer with a master's, right? The Kreuzers I know of all serious Yerushalmi Jews.
This year he's a Rosh Kailul in Eretz Yisrael and a Chevener. And if you would see him, you would never believe he has a master's from Tel Aviv. So he fits with your profile of what you know about the Kreuzers. Okay. Anyway, like this. So first we mentioned, now let's go like this. As far as halachic Seforim, so we just to briefly recap one Nakuda, we mentioned that already in the times of the Gaonim, Reb Shmuel ben Chafnoi Gaon, he dedicated a complete work on Hilchos Gittin. Part of it was printed a few years back from the Cairo Gniza discoveries, and it seems to have been a complete massive work just on Hilchos Gittin. We also we spoke about that briefly in the previous episode. Now, fast forward, we have Marshal, the Mordechai. So the Mordechai has been recently redone based on manuscripts, most recently by Mechon Yerushalayim, and this is, everyone knows, the Mordechai is a famous work in the world of halacha. But these are known works, and of course the Rishonim, the Rambam, the Torah, and all these, they have the halachas of Hilchos Gittin. The question is, what am I referring to? So like this, we begin the story with a work found quoted often by the Beis Yosef, and from there most people never saw it, but they're quoting the Beis Yosef. It's called Kundreisen. It was published once in Kushta, somewhere between 1515 and 1518, extremely rare. Today, of course, thanks to Mechon Yerushalayim, we have this work with footnotes. It was reprinted in their Seder Chalitza of Rabbi Yaakov Margolis, which we'll discuss soon. What's found in this work? In the name of this work, and what is this work? So Yari, in his introduction to the publishing of the Seforim in Kushta, has a whole discussion showing that it's, interestingly enough, that we think you go to shul today, everyone's full Shabbos, it's full of gilyonis. What does that mean? Well, parsha sheets. Everyone's sending parsha sheets, and whatever. You go to certain places, there could be hundreds. I knew people that collected all various parsha sheets. They had collections of dozens of parsha sheets that would come out weekly in Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, so this is started much earlier, and what they would do is they would publish small parts of a sefer, sort of like advertisement, and put it in shuls Erev Shabbos. This is going back when? In the early 1500s. A lot of these works ended up getting lost, and that's why some of them they have these funny names. One such sefer was a collection of material on Hilchos Gittin. We don't even know who the author is. We don't know exactly when he's from, but it seems that the Beis Yosef held that it's important enough and reliable enough. He quotes it dozens of times in Hilchos Gittin. But it's very rare, and most of the Paiskim, when they're talking about it or using it, they're using it based on the Beis Yosef. One Paisik that did have it was the Get Pashut, which we're going to get to, and Rabbi Efraim Margolis, which we'll also discuss the significance of this. He had this rare work in his library. Now, who authored it? It's unclear. Some want to attribute it to the Tashbitz. Okay, the Get Pashut says it's unclear. It's a collection of materials. But Lamaisa, it does not seem it's a Tashbitz. Efraim Margolis would have realized it's a Tashbitz. He was a big expert on these types of things, and in the tshuva that he has, at least one of them he's dealing with a few pieces of Tashbitz throughout there. He would have mentioned that he thinks that this is the work of the Tashbitz. Anyway, we don't know who it is. Anyway, but the significance is that the Beis Yosef is bringing this down in Hilchos Gittin, but only in Hilchos Gittin. So here we could pause for a moment and backtrack with the Yesod. Professor Yisrael Tashma, many years ago, noticed something that in somewhere around the 1400s, on certain topics, work started coming out. L'mashal on Mila, Hilchos Mila, a work came out from a particular person, and it's clear, based on the work, that this person wasn't a Talmid Chacham. But what was he? He was an expert mayil. So he wrote a work of all the halachas of Mila, and he was even having tainus on other mayalim. And the point of the work was to create sort of a handbook. Tashma shows that there were other such topics, that the mumchim of the topic means not necessarily a Talmid Chacham, but a person who had a Kabbalah from a Rebbe or some sort that these are the proper halachas, and he would write these down and publish it. Now, so what happens is, there's such a thing, L'mashal Hilchos Mila, and he's located in other areas, such a type of thing. So Hilchos Gittin, it could be, this chibur might be a similar type of thing. Why am I mentioning this? It's because some of these works that we're about to discuss, we don't have from these people almost anything else. We don't know anything about them, really. But it turns out that most of the cases, at least in Hilchos Gittin, the works that I'm going to be mentioning were noted Talmidei Chachamim, not just an expert in Hilchos Gittin. Obviously, to be a mayil, although you have to be an expert in the mechanics of how to do the Mila, you don't necessarily have to be. It's not as big as a responsibility, so to speak, as Hilchos Gittin, but it could be mayilim. We'll argue. And this, okay. Now, anyway, like this. In 1553, a small work was published from Rabbi Yehudah Mintz. in the back of his Tshuva Sefer. It's called Seder Get. Now, this Rabbi Yehudah Mintz, who came out at 100 years old in 1509, was one of the Gedolei Adar in his time. And he didn't write a lot of tshuvas, but we know of him. We know of many of his talmidim. I believe he's a talmid from the Beis Medrash of the Maril. Anyway, he publishes a small sefer in depth of Seder Get. He doesn't publish it, but I think it's his grandson or someone, when they publish his tshuvas, and not even a lot of tshuvas, but they publish this small work, and this is quoted Keseder in Hilchos Gittin by all the Paiskim. Now, it doesn't have sugyas. It's not sugyas. It's straight up halacha, like a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, what it is. Now, recently Zichron Aaron published it from manuscript, but they don't tell you, it's a little sloppy what they do, they don't tell you that it's already in the 1553 edition of the work. Okay, anyway, but it's not I would say doesn't have the Hezbeirim and the sugyas. Fine. Moving forward, it was an important source, Lamashal, for the Rama. Now, this gets us to the next important work, and this is perhaps the most important work written on Hilchos Gittin. This is from a Yid, Rabbi Yaakov Margolis. Basically, Rabbi Yaakov Margolis wrote what's called the Seder Get. It's published by Mechon Yerushalayim, by Yitzchak Satz, 2 volumes, starting in 1993. It's been reissued a few times, each time with additions, and it has other materials in it relating to Gittin. Now, what's the story with this? Basically is the Rama in Hilchos Gittin, all of the halachas, most of the halachas is based on this chibur from Rabbi Yaakov Margolis, but more than that, in Siman, after Siman Kuf Nun Daled, which is where Gittin ends, something unique happens. You find that the Rama sort of has a Seder Get, a few pages where he has comments on this Seder Get, sort of like someone took all the 50 semanim of Hilchos Gittin and made like a kitzer of it, of Lamaisa. That's the bottom line, because in Shulchan Aruch it's every hechatimtza, so here it's more a manual of sorts. And the Rama comments on it, and right away you see the ha'ara in Shulchan Aruch, the printer added in. This is the Seder Get of this Rabbi Yaakov Margolis, which Rama has been quoting. And now, so it's obviously very important if the Rama is using this work as his main chibur, through his main source in Hilchos Gittin. Now, it's interesting also, we don't find anywhere else in Shulchan Aruch that the Rama does such a thing, that like after a bunch of semanim, he brings a kitzer of whatever sefer would be. Okay. But this is because the complexity of Hilchos Gittin and all the details, it needed a hands-on thing, and it was very common. What I mean to say very common is that people have this thing that Gittin is not so negeya. It's sort of more that it's taboo to talk about Gittin. But Gittin was very relevant, and it's very much more common than people realize. Recently, I came across an article from Yisrael Yuval, an expert of the period of time, a few generations before the Rama, showing that in that period of time, and it's going to play out what we're going to be discussing later on, that there were many, many Gittin being written. And he's even trying to understand why. He has theories behind that, but Gittin was a day. It doesn't mean that every person knew about, but it happened much more than people realize. Just to see, in more recent times, in the 1800s, there's a fascinating book called Jewish Marriage and Divorce in Imperial Russia, from a woman Fries, and this is a fascinating book which has a ton of documented archive information showing how prevalent Gittin was, much more than people realize. Okay, now, but returning back to so now, that's why the Rama, it's a very important thing in Shulchan Aruch. The Rama makes a big deal and sums it up, and because it has a lot of details. But it's back to this Rabbi Yaakov Margolis that we're talking about. So Rabbi Yaakov Margolis, if you go even more than this, the Rama, we know today we take this for granted. You want to understand the Rama, what do? You open up your Darkei Moshe. Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis writes Barichos in his Mailas HaYuchsin. If you want to understand the Rama, the first place you have to do is Darkei Moshe. Problem is Darkei Moshe on Even Ezer. People don't know this. The first time the complete Darkei Moshe was published was by Mechon Yerushalayim a few years back. Now, but if you open up to the Tur, the Darkei Moshe, in the 1702, they have a Kitzer Darkei Moshe, and that's what they have from 1702, which is ironic. You have the Gadol Hadar, the Rama, the Paisik of Shulchan Aruch. 1570s, his Shulchan Aruch is published. The Darkei Moshe on Even Ezer, the Kitzer, is first published 1702. How many years is that? Almost 130 years. But even that, it's only a Kitzer till today on Even Ezer. It's the same. It's a similar stories with the rest of Shulchan Aruch. I'm not going to discuss it right now. But what we see over there is, at the end, Seder Get Al Pi Rabbi Yaakov Margolis. And you could, now, if you want to find out a little bit about this, normally you look in the beginning of the volumes of the Shulchan Aruch or your tour of Mechon Yerushalayim, but this you have to look in the back of the volumes. Okay. Anyway, point is like this: he is the man, so to speak, in Hilchos Gittin. Who is he? So Mechon Yerushalayim says they're going to have an intro in the next volume. This is a Keseda thing that they promise in various Seforim that they publish, that they're going to put out an introduction. It helps them buy time. The second volume came out, and it's been reprinted a few times, and they've yet to put out an introduction of who this Rabbi Yaakov Margolis is. Now, luckily, I have a copy over here. There's a lady in 1978, Tzipora Bruchson, wrote a master's in Bar Ilan all about this Rabbi Yaakov Margolis before Mechon Yerushalayim even published his work, showing him to be a tremendous Adam Gadol at the time. And just to mention very briefly, we know him to be a tremendous Talmud Chacham. The Rama, in a historical work of his, the Rama has ha'aris on the Yuchsin. He brings him down as one of the Gedolim, and makes sense because Rama, as we just said, it bases all of Hilchos Gittin off this person. Anyway, he dies in 1501. So it means he's a ben daire of the Moshe Mintz that we quoted earlier. He has a few different sons, and the sons are involved with the Dayanim. They're involved with the publishing of this chibur of his on Hilchos Gittin, which remains a manuscript. Most of it ends up remaining a manuscript until the 1980s, but it was preserved and used and discussed because the Rama took it and used it throughout his works. Anyway, who he is, he's involved with a controversy, which perhaps we might have an episode of Masechtas Kedushin, a very big controversy. We might, and therefore we might dig deeper into his background. But it's very interesting to see. We know him to be a tremendous Adam Gadol. We don't exactly even know who his Rebbe is. That's also up for debate. Okay. Anyway, there's a be that as it may, he was the person. There's quotes of the Gedolim of the time, how they call him. Just to quote one such quote, this is what one of the Gedolei Achronim in Chuvas Olei Tam writes about him, and there's other such quotes to say that he was Mamash Adam Gadol, not just he knew Hilchos Gittin. Okay. Anyway, another important work is the Amshel Shleima, who also brings down Kisvei Yad that he saw, but the problem is the Amshel Shleima, the Maharshal, who's also dying in the 1570s. When is his work on Yamshel Shleima Gittin published for the first time? 1761. So the two great superstars, the Rama, I'm telling you, is Darkei Moshe, takes forever till it's published. The Maharshal, who's basically the Gedolim of the Achronim, his work also takes forever till it gets published. Interestingly enough, where was this? This was in this Ksav Yad was in the library of Rabbi Yitzchak Pozna, who's famous for being possibly the Rebbe of the Magan Avrohom, someone that I devoted to in a podcast that I hope to release soon about the library of the Darkei Teshuva and the Minchas Elazar, 2 episodes, and I speak a little bit about this this Rabbi Yitzchak Pozna because the Chuvas of this Gadol, Rabbi Yitzchak Pozna, was found where in the library of the Munkatcher. Now, Lamaisa, it seems the Paiskim had some Paiskim early on had the Ksav Yad of the Amshel Shleima, so they were able to use it. Fine, Ankan, the Maharshal. Now let's move forward. What was Lamaisa out there for someone in the let's say in 1611, Lublin, there's a work published on Chumash called Zichron Moshe. This is a person who's a Talmud of the Maharshal and the Rama. It's a Persian Chumash. He's possibly a brother of the Maharshal. In Parshas Kiseitze, all of a sudden you find he has it on the pasuk of Kasav Sefer Krisos. He says, "Hine avar lecha alpha beta mishemes anoshim anoshim kidei lemtzoi bekal Hashem shatem mevakesh hein deish hein deisha vehu vekino." So basically, he has a list of the aleph beis of all the names because it's negeya for Hilchos Gittin how to spell the names. This work becomes the go-to sefer. Now, the Maharshal is not out, as I said. The Darkei Moshe is not completely out. It just has to say Get. So this sefer Taka becomes very important. It's been recently reissued in an edition from Rabbi Krieger, a noted expert on Rashi, and in the back they have a sefer of his on different aspects of halacha and hagam, very short sefer, but it's quoted a lot by different some early on places. Okay, fine. Moving on, we have Moshe Mintz, also a Ben Daira, early person from the 1415. He dies in 1480. Similar, he's in the same dar of Rabbi Yehudah Mintz, and he has a chibur on Gittin, but that's only published in 1616. And the Paiskim seem to have it. He's a Talmud of Trumas Hadeshen, and Baruch Hashem Mechon Yerushalayim reissued this. Another important work that makes major breakthrough in Hilchos Gittin is a sefer called Sefer Shaimos, Sefer Shaimos, I believe it's called, and it's who's the author? Reb Simcha Hakayim. Now, Reb Simcha Koyen is actually the footnoter, the person who edited it was Reb Moshe Zakut, and it's printed in 1657. And basically, this is an encyclopedia on names and incredible amount of information. But again, he doesn't deal with all Hilchos Gittin. He's also dealing with how to spell the names. Now, already in the introduction, in the shar of the Sefer says, make sure to read my introduction. And the reason is because he leads a campaign against that people were charging for writing a get. And he leads a campaign with Makairis that you should not charge for writing a get. Anyway, this Sefer becomes one of the most important Seforim ad hayom in Hilchos Gittin. And we know from other sources, Kreuzer deals with it in his masters, documenting sources to show he was Adam Gadol, not just in Hilchos Gittin, that he just knew how to spell names. Now, we will return to this work soon because there's a key point in what some of his sources were. Moving on is the Sefer Nachlas Shiva. Nachlas Shiva, the authors are Shmuel. He dies in 16. He's active from the year he's born, so to speak, 1625. He dies in 1681. Who is he? A Talmud of the Taz. He's also a Talmud of the Vei Emudim, the son of the Shla, who takes over the Shla's position. Who, if one wants to read about him, you can read about him in Yeshiva Rama B'Fiyarda from Rabbi Hamburger. The Kitzer, this work is published in 1667, 1668. It's a few volumes. Everything you need to know about all Hilchos Shtaros. A massive amount of material is related to every aspect of a get. All Hilchos Get, how to write it and how to spell it, and the names also, based on a wealth of sources. A Madura Basra of this is printed in 1681. Chuvas of his is 1692. Now, even in this work, there are other halachas, which is quoted Marshal by the Magan Avrohom. And we say he's a ben doyer of the Magan Avrohom. The Magan Avrohom is already using his work. It's very important stuff relating to minhagim. And this basically becomes ad hayom the most important work for all shtaros, kedushin, ksuvas, everything. This is the go-to sefer. All the poskim handle with it. Okay, like everything else in recent years, a new beautiful edition comes out, 3 volumes, which has in it manuscript information, all the editions of the Sefer, 400 Haggais of the Shalom Moshe from some obscure edition of it, with new footnotes explaining many of his sources and new tshuvas from Ksav Yad. This also becomes in this Seforim a important work on Hilchos Gittin Bichlal, and the poskim use it. Okay, now. So these are the various works that are specifically, we just mentioned, a lot of them were just specifically about Hilchos Gittin. What about the Shulchan Aruch? So now the Taz, we know, wrote on Even Ezer, but the Taz is only published way after he dies in 1754 is when it's first published. So this is not, at least until 1754, it's not as important work out there. The Maisa of the Taz and Even Ezer, everyone knows, is not the Paisik. It's not even on the side. It's on the 2 sides. You have to look further down. Who are the Perushim on this so we know part of it is the Chelkas Mechaikak, tremendous Gaon, and he dies in 1658. His Chibur is published by his son in 1670. It was written very bekitzer. Now, what's interesting is like this: in Siman Kuf Chaftes, he gets up to basically Siman Kuf Chaftes, so a large amount of Hilchos Gittin is not dealt by him. He didn't write about it. Now, but he did have the Chibur of Margolis that we mentioned earlier, and uses it a lot. Fine. Now, but what's interesting is like this: in the standard, when they printed the Chelkas Mechaikak, so it stops at Siman Kuf Chaftes as far as a parish, but then at Kuf Nun Dalid, all of a sudden you find another Seder Get. We said that in Shulchan, if you open up your stand Shulchan Aruch, there's a Seder Get of Margolis with Rama Zaharis on it. There's another Seder Get, and it says it's from Ramichel Yuspis Mikrakow, a Seder Get from him. And this is published in the same time as the Chelkas Mechaikak in 1670. What happens is the son of the Chelkas Mechaikak, he meets this Ramachal's son, and they make up, oh, my father's work doesn't finish, and you're about to print your work. So this Ramachal's son gives him his father's work on Gittin, and it's published in part of the Shulchan Aruch. And ad hayom, you'll find after the Seder Get of Yaakov Margolis is the Hilchos Gittin of this Ramachal. Ma'aseh, we don't have anything else with this Ramachal, but we know he was on the Bezin of the Taisis Yantif. Okay, Lamaisa, because of money concerns, only a kitzer of the work was published, and only recently, in the past 25 years, 30 years, whatever it is, Machon published a complete work based on manuscripts. Now, earlier on, it seems in 1861, the complete work is called Berchas Hamayim. A complete work was published with haskamas of great gedolim, such as Iksav Sefer, Shemin Sefer, Yad Eliezer, the Shalom Meshiv, but not complete. That's right. In 1983, Rav Hershel publishes it based on manuscripts. So this is another thorough work of a gadol we only have on Hilchos Gittin. Fine. But that's not as much focusing on names. Okay. Now we go on to who's the other nice Kalim in Shulchan Aruch that everyone knows, the Beis Shmuel. So the Beis Shmuel, Shmuel bar Uri Shraga Feivish, born in 1640, dies in 1698. A Talmud of who? The Rebbe of Heschel, who was definitely not a Rebbe, way before Rebbes, but we call him the Rebbe of Heschel. Anyway, if one wants to read about him, a fascinating chapter. There's not so much known about him, but Rabbi Yam Shlomo Hamburger in his beautiful work, Yeshiva Rama B'Fiyarda, Chelik Aleph, page 227 and onwards, has a nice amount of information about this great Gadol, who everyone knows. In Even Ezer, you can't move without the Beis Shmuel. Anyway, in 1689, he publishes his work the first time. Then he becomes Rosh Hashiva in the year of Fiyarda. And then in 1694, he reissues the work within 5 years. What's going on? Why is he reintroducing a new Madura of his work? It seems and he writes this in Zakdama, that he first he got a yeshiva, so he was now able to learn with Bachram. So I guess he was learning with Talmidim. We spoke this out with the Maharshal. He's very makbid to write on the things that he had with Talmidim. Anyway, basically he gets the Ksav Yad of who? The Taz, which we said was only published in the 1700s, but he gets access to it. So we know the Taz, one of the Gedolei Hadar, to have his chibur. Also, he gets the Sefer Shaimos of Reb Simcha, so it's very important for Toras Gittin. So therefore, we find when you get to Siman Kuf Chav Tes, after Siman Kuf Chav Tes, you open up your standard Shulchan Aruch. All of a sudden, there's a list of names and how to spell names in the Beis Shmuel, and this is what the Paiskim. This is the Aleph Beis in Hilchas Gittin. When you're talking about how to spell names, it all comes from here. And he writes what happened. I got a hold of the Chibur Nechmad of Reb Simcha, the Seder Get R Michael Reb Yisbish that we spoke about, the Nachlas Shiva, Muktzah Gaon Balturizavim and Sharas Farm. So this is why you have to reissue it. Fine. Now, just to go very briefly to a few more Svarim, and then we'll get to some understanding behind what's going on over here. Number one is a Get Pashut. Ramoshe Chaviv. Someone wrote that I didn't discuss this work in the previous episode on the Sefarim and the Masechta because it's a halacha sefer, and I was going to deal with it over here. This becomes also one of the most important works on Hilchas Gittin Ad Yoim. Put out a nice edition by Mechon Yerushalayim, and it was done by this. He's famous for being the author of the Kappas Tamarim and on Sukkah. People know him from the Yom Teruah and other Svarim of his. Who publishes it? The author of the Mamloyes, Rabbi Yaakov Kuli. He does the Aricha. We have even Hagoyis of Rabbi Kiveger on this chibur. It's incredibly barichos, unbelievable information, and even live accounts of people of Gedolim that he had access to beforehand. And he writes another work called Ezras Nashim, which is more focused on the names, the spelling of the names, as he said, because that's another aspect in Hilchas Gittin. There's another tremendous Gaon, which Lamdanim loved this sefer from Rabbi Elio Alfandri, wrote a sefer Michtav Me'Eliyahu, 1723 with Amkus. Then you have 1747. This sefer has not really been picked up by most. It's Chukei Derech from Rabbi Kasil Kaufman, the son-in-law of the Magan Avrohom. What's the chashivas for me of this sefer is he had the Ksav Yad of the Magan Avrohom on Shenas Hanashim Benashim. So here we have Psakim in Even Ezer of the Magan Avrohom on this topic. Okay, there's a sefer Get Mekusher from Rafal Bula, published in 1766. Recently, this is a 1,000-page volume where he's handling Be'iyun into all aspects of Hilchas Gittin. There's another Get Mekusher from Rabbi Yonah Levanoin, who in 1785, he's the Rebbe the Chida, which is going very beyond on the Get Pashut. As I said, the Get Pashut becomes one of the go-to Svarim. A lot of Paiskim, that's all they had. Maharshal, the Sefer that we quoted all the way in the beginning, that the Beis Yosef uses, called Kundreisen. So who had it? The Get Pashut had it, and the Paiskim have used him also. Another early Sefer called Get Mekusher. Obviously, it's there's a bunch of Svarim on the Masechta called Get Mekusher. It's from Ohalei Shem. He's focusing more on the Seder Michael that we mentioned earlier. Okay. Then 1813, another Sefer that we spoke about a little bit before, is the Toras Gittin, and it's published right away in 1820. It's also on the Masechta Halacha. Okay. Ad Kan, until we get to, this is basically, we're up to 1813, and we've already listed many, many Svarim on the Halachas that people have.
So I want to give Rabbi Broad a chance to breathe. The Toras Gittin you just mentioned is not the Nesivus of Toras Gittin. I'm assuming that's another one. It is the Nesivus.
That was it.
Okay.
Now, okay.
So one second. Wait. One more. You threw in the son-in-law of the Magan Avrohom. Just give me 30 seconds on him, and the father-in-law of the Chida. Is that who you threw in?
No,
your last
Rebbe of the Chida.
The Rebbe of the Chida.
So the Rebbe of the Chida is a different project, but his name is Rabbi Yonah Levanoin, and he dies in 1760. We don't have so much from him, but it seems he's one of the main Rabbeim of the Chida. I think I even saw an auction that they had maybe something of his or of the Chida's. with notes of his or something recently. But anyway, what's important is that you're seeing the Get Pashut, which is only printed in 1719. So he's the Rabbi Yochanan Levanon is the Ben Doyer mamish right after the Get Pashut, and you see how much he's being mimic in that sefer. But as far as the Magan Avram's son-in-law, this is a different thing. Mirz Hashem, one day, hopefully, we'll discuss it more at length. But the point that I was all of a sudden when I saw it a few years back is like the Magan Avram and Hilchas and relating to Hilchas Even Ezer. So that was what was fascinating. Just obviously we've discussed in the past. I have a special chiba to the Magan Avram, so I just have to throw it out there.
Is his son-in-law mentioned at all in the Magan Avram? Does he quote his son-in-law?
No. But he's a Talmud. But he is a Talmud of the Magan Avram. Okay. Now here from this point in the next few minutes, we're going to now try to be more mimic and to understand this story, what's going on and what's the sources, to liven this up. Just not as much bibliography. And the story is like this. Basically, in the past, I've mentioned a few times there's a Yid Rabbi Efraim Zal Margolis. Rabbi Efraim Zal Margolis, born in 1760 and dies in 1828. Now, he wasn't a Rav, he was a Balabas in the city of Bride, which was a big city in the time in Galicia. But he wasn't just a Balabas, he was someone that he was very wealthy, but he had to do with all the Gedolei Hadar of both generations. Meaning, say, already at the age of, as a teenager, 15, 16, he's in contact with Gedolim such as, numerous times, the Nodah B'Yehuda, the Haflah, the Shagas Aryeh, and others, and then people closer to his age, such as Chaim Volozhiner, and many others. And certain Gedolim, he mamash has very, very close relationships with them, spanning years and years, such as some Sefer and others. Now, but besides for having to do with a lot of Gedolim, he wrote a ton. And not only did he write a ton, he became a noted expert in many different areas in Torah. One such area was the area of Even Ezer in general. He authored dozens of tshuvas. He was noted as a Aguna expert. How do you become a Aguna expert is because they see that you have what to say and it's good, and all the Gedolim are consulting you. We have many of these tshuvas. He published them in his lifetime. Now, but besides this, besides for being an Even Ezer, he was an extra expert in Hilchas Gittin, authoring dozens of tshuvas on the sugya of Hilchas Gittin. But even more than that, he wrote a sefer on called Tiv Gittin. And basically, what happens is like this. In 1819, he has a relative of his start to work on it, the Pischei Moshe, who we'll discuss about a little bit in the episode on the Seforim Masechtas Kedushin. L'maisa, not too much comes out, but in 1822, he finishes publishing the whole work of Efraim Zal Margolis on Gittin. And we're going to discuss in a moment what it is. L'maisa, we see that this sefer once this sefer comes out on Hilchas Gittin, it's the go-to sefer, even at Ayayim, even though we're going to list still, there are plenty more Sefarim in what it's trying to do in Hilchas Gittin, which is like this. Basically, we mentioned there's an encyclopedia, which the Beis Shmuel, using the early sources of how to spell all the names, but of men and women, but there's also cities, how to spell cities and all these things. So this is an encyclopedia, how to spell names. So you'll say, big deal, spelling, who cares? When you see the knowledge that's used to get to the conclusions, that's already what's happening in the Maharshal and some of the earlier works. Most notably in the Sefer Shaimos, and in the Nachlas Shiva even, you see the bekiyas of what they're using for their sources and how to spell the name. And in Mirz Hashem, in one of the next coming up episodes, we're going to see how the spelling of a name caused a ganze tumul. How do you spell a name? And then apostles again, possibly. And we're going to see a little bit about that right now. So, but basically what happens is, once Rabbi Efraim Zal Margolis publishes a sefer, it's the go-to sefer. How do I know this? L'mashal. We now have notes of various psukim of from the Pinkas, the Bezdin of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, contemporary of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Many of the psukim in Hilchas Shaimos is based on what? The chibur of Rabbi Efraim Zal Margolis. As far as out as in London, we have the chief rabbi, Rav Shlomo Herschel, who's really a son of Rav Tzvi Levine. Basically, he's the brother of the famous Shol Levine, the Psamim Reish, but he was a Chashav Rav for 40 years out in London. His Bezdin, when they used to consult, when they had difficulties, who did they consult? Efraim Zal Margolis. We have now the psakim. They weren't published mostly, but we have the pinkasim of this bezin still exists. You look in the Tshuvas farm of Lutfische Gedolim, such as the Tshuvas Pnei Yechai, the Pardes Rimonim, the Rabbi Yosef Zachariah Stern, all the, and we can list on endlessly. We have Rachmanis over here, but you see the chashivas that this sefer plays out in the world of halacha once it comes on the scene. And I'm going to try to explain why that is so even also. The Marshal Aruch HaShulchan, who's not so much into quoting Achrayim, also the Aruch HaShulchan also uses this work. Okay, but the question is, what's so unique about this work that makes it become so special and so accepted? So really, we have to go backwards, and this is what to get up to understanding what's going on with all these svarim. What are the sources for this sefer and a lot of the svarim beforehand? So, Lamashal, to give an example, if I could find it. Hold on, that's always the problem in this room. Okay, so we mentioned Rabbeinu Simcha Koyen. He writes one of the most chashuv svarim on Hilchas Get of the Shaimos. What's his sources? So he writes in his Hagdama that basically he got different Gittin, early kisvei yad of Gittin that he tracked down. He got from different people. He lists some of them, and then he says Lamashal, the domestic Eliezer, one of the great paiskim in the 1640s, we don't have it, but somehow he got the chibur of the domestic Eliezer. He got b'matana when he passed by his city. He gave it to the sefer. He gave it to this Reb Simcha. So now he uses it throughout the work. So basically, what I'm saying is he's using manuscripts of early documents of early Gittin that he collected. Then he even says a sad story. There was a certain gadol, Reb Shimon Chius, who passed by the city, and on his way to Eretz Yisrael. And he wasn't even Zaycha to be Makabel Pnei Shchina. Because what happens? The boat came on Shabbos in the year, this is about 16, one second, it's about 1650, 55, something like that. And he dies on the boat. So he couldn't even see this gadol. But afterwards they were selling the svarim of this gadol. And this gadol, this Reb Shimon Chius, had a Kundreisen Hashemis of the Maharshal and Reb Yitzchak Chius and Reb Nachem Chius, early Dayanim. So he was able to buy it. So he got early manuscripts of great Gedolim, and that's what was a prime source for his. And then he lists out a few other kisvei yad that he got from different collections. So besides for going through the sugya, all the relative possible ways how to figure out how to spell the name, he now got a ton of manuscripts. This is the Sefer Shaimos. Turns out, when we go back to our Rabbi Yaakov Margolis, so he's right after the generation of Maril. He also got tons of different documents of Gittin. And when you look in Rabbi Efraim Zal Margolis, besides for having this massive Seforim collection and using all these rare Seforim, he also had numerous documents of manuscripts of Gittin. And this is how they were able to paskin, because they were using this collection. Now, this brings up the following issues. Number one is that there's halacha by get that it's brought down at least that you're supposed to rip the get afterwards. Why? That's a different discussion. Another deal is there's a shayla if a get is muktzah. So there's a early chibur which is sort of like riddles, and it's called I think Sefer Chazain, and basically he says there what's something that the Zman of Chazal was asur on Shabbos, but nowadays it's mutter. Answer: a get on Shabbos. It's no longer muktzah. Why not? So if you look in the Darkei Moshe and the Paiskim in Even Ezer and the Magan Avrohom in Shin Zayin, because a get has what I'm now telling you. You can learn halachas from the get. So although at one point they used to destroy the get, at a certain point in time they realized that we need to keep the gittin around, because this is a way to have hands-on documentation, how to write a get. Now we're going to explain in a minute what changed that all of a sudden needs this documentation even. But it seems from somewhere around the times in the Maril, gittin started to be saved. We see this there's all different sources. Kreiser documents this also in his masters. The Maril, when you're training a Rav, you want to have real documentation. You want to be able to see with your eyes what it is. Now, I mentioned in the Shir on Gittin that the Minsker Gadol was a tutor came to teach his kid, and the first 2 weeks the kids didn't know anything what's going on. So what happened? The tutor said to the Minsker Gadol, all of a sudden, then after the 3rd week, they start knowing. So I brought Barichos, a whole story that once they start to understand when you begin Gittin, what's a star and all the psukim and everything, it changes. One of the missions of the Rabbi Schwade in starting Lamashal in this thing that we're doing over here, speaking is, and he did this in various episodes where he has episodes with Lamashal and they're learning, Daf Yomi was learning Psachim, how to make matzahs, and all different aspects. And Lamashal more recently, for Nazir, he flew to Eretz Yisrael, went to the hospitals to see live all the shilas. You could hear it, but when Ein Adayim Shmiya L'Riyah. So what's happening is the mission of one of the many missions of Aldaf, which is trying to make it Lamaisa, that practical, that people could see it, which they're about to release. From what I understand, Aldaf is about to release a cipher writing a get. So this is the Maril already realized it, and they started keeping it. Interestingly enough, the Yosef Aimitz, there's a passage from the Yosef Aimitz. I heard this a while ago from this Rafal Kreuzer. He talks about burning before Pesach all the different documentation in the Bezdin because they had all these different psakim. Yeah, too much. Basically, like to keep the records, So in our days, people, academics would, what? Someone was destroying all these documentation. What world could be built from all these, from all this? And Lamaisa, some of it did survive, and Lamashal, Rabbi Efraim Zal Margolis, this Rabbi Simcha Kayin, they used it, they got it, they tracked it down, and this is what helped them for their Gittin.
I don't know if this is an old minig and connected to what you're talking about, but I know the local bezdin here, after they write a get and they give the get, the husband gives the get to the woman, the bezdin takes back the get. They write some kind of shtar that the get was given and they keep the get.
Right, that's all related to this sugya. It's related to all this topic if one goes into the Adosif. Yes, exactly. But the point is, there's so much to know. So in order to be a Rav in these sugyas, you have to have, not only did you have to know all the Svarim and all the Bekiyas, how they figured. How did they know these names? They had a Bekiyas in Tanakh. They had a Bekiyas in Midrashim. They had a Bekiyas in Chazal. In every way a name is spelled in different places. And we're going to see more. I'm going to illustrate it more in the next episode. But the point is that Lamashal, Rabbi Efraim Zal Margolis, at this point in time, his library, he had a crazy Svarim library. He had manuscripts. He had manuscripts of Gittin. Okay. And this is what helped him reach to make this like encyclopedic work that even afterwards it remains the go-to sefer. Now, the Maril, it turns out, is L'Shitasai. We find that in recent materials, the Maril found when they were learning about the Mishkan, the Avnei Achaish and everything. It seems they would show diagrams and make diagrams to see bechush for Talmidim and even Rabbanim. That's what I'm saying. I'm extending this to Hilchos Gittin, and I'm extending that. That's why I changed the halacha that a get is no longer Muktzah. Says it's a Afin Magan Avram based on many Mekayers. We're not going to go into all the details of all the Mekayers. Now, what happens? What changed? What makes it so complicated? Why do they start having to keep names? It basically is, obviously what I'm about to say is in 1 minute, but each one is hours of drushes, and the halacha Svarim is basically the history of two names when this happens. A Goyish name, cities, how to spell it, all these pulmusin, they didn't have, they can't go, okay, let me open up the Rambam, how to spell Krakow. The Rambam's not going to help you. So you needed to have all this information. And Lamashal, by the time it gets to Efraim Zal Margolis in the 1800s, he has who knows how much. Okay, now, just understand, and Reb Dovid Oppenheim, it's very sad. Reb Dovid Oppenheim had one of the most incredible Seforim libraries before Efraim Zal Margolis. And we find that he used to collect all these types of materials also. And in a tshuva of Gittin that was only published very recently, we see how does he uses dozens of manuscripts that he has from this Rabbi Yaakov Margolis, from the Trumas Hadeshem, which was only printed in our century. He has from the Shlah. He has all different documents and different ways how to trace, how to spell names. He had it in his library, but sadly, not everyone had access to the library, and even he didn't always have access to the library, and his Tshuva Sefer and his Sefarim were never really published, so it couldn't have the impact on the world. Whereas Rabbi Efraim Zal Margolis, he luckily did publish his materials, and he lists out the manuscripts that he had in Hagdama to his Sefer, and more throughout the works you see it, and he's using print unbelievable. He's using manuscripts unbelievable throughout the work. Now, just to be, we're getting closer to the end. I have Rachmanis over here. It's close to Shabbos also. Is like this. First of all, the Nodah B'Yehuda, and this is what is fascinating. The sugya of names. So at one point I come across the Minsker Gadol we just mentioned says something about the people when they talk about names they make up all different things. I didn't understand what he's not that type to write, sort of very sharp about it. But anyway, it turns out going through the materials of this Rafael Kreuzer, he points to a fascinating discussion. There was a Rav in a city in Europe called Pilitz, and it's near Krakow. Basically, there's a Rav there, and they have to write a get. Bad luck for this Rav is there was 4 Talmidim of the Nodah B'Yehuda in this city at the time. And they start telling this Rav, they write to Nodah B'Yehuda, they don't understand. How in the world does this guy write a get? Because it seems it was a very big problem how to write a get in said city. And what did they do? They would go to a different city because it was a problem. So first, it's fascinating is the Nodah B'Yehuda, you see, busy man that he was, one of the Gedolei Hadar, which we hope to discuss about him in one of the future episodes relating to Pulmus and Gittin. So he says, Atem Talmidai, Chaviva, Yodol Lechem, Ki Tirdas Rabbas Alai, Ubefrat Tirdas Al Talmidim, V'afal Pikein, Lahavaschem, Ha'azal, Lahavas Emes. I'm going to write to you about this discussion that you're bringing up. Okay. Turns out that when the Nodah B'Yehuda, when he's handling this, he also talks about seeing Old Gittin from all places and that they have and how to spell the name and different names and what he saw of different Gedolim and Kisvei Yad. Fascinating. Even the Nodah B'Yehuda, that's this basically what I'm trying to say is at a certain point in time, Gittin is based on research. You have to have documentation of manuscripts. Okay. Anyway, in the course of this discussion, turns out, and then you says this Rav seems to know his stuff, even though based on the correspondence that he has about him. And he comes up with a Meirdik Chiddush Nodah B'Yehuda. He says the get could be good in this particular city. I know get was written. What do you got to do? Basically, you write a get and you say a name, and every day in a month in all the shuls you have to announce that this is the name, and you're kaiveya now that this is the name in the city. So I suspect is when the Minsk Gadol saw this tshuva, where in the world does Nodah B'Yehuda come up with making up such an akudah? So Nodah B'Yehuda obviously tries to explain where he's coming from, but there's no early Makairis that you could start being kaiveya a name and all the shiurim and how to do it. But the Nodah B'Yehuda, we know the Gadol from the Gedolei Achreinim that we have in the world of halacha, he was able to do this. The Chassam Sofer, interestingly enough, says that this he creates based on this Nodah B'Yehuda that a city that doesn't have a name, you're not allowed to, you can't make it sort of like a takana. He learns a pshat into this Nodah B'Yehuda that if there never was a name, a get written in this city, you cannot. There's nothing to do about it. Okay, fine. Anyway, just to get to the end over here, it's like this. So Efraim Zal Margolis, he becomes the go-to sefer. You see, even a klapi the Chassam Sofer in that dar, there was a yid, a Rav in a city in Pest, in Hungary. It eventually becomes part of Budapest, but at that time it was a small city. Also, they had a din how to write a get. So this Rav writes a whole tshuva to Efraim Zalman, and then he's tumbling about the Tiv Gittin that he heard just came out. And you see a fascinating tshuva and the ideas of Efraim Zalman and even this Rav about it. Interestingly enough, this Rav, in trying to explain why he's reaching his conclusions, he says he wrote to the Chassam Sofer, but he wants to hear what Efraim Zalman says. Efraim Zalman writes pages on the topic, and Efraim Zalman, interesting, this Rav, he quotes Mendelssohn in this conversation, which is a fascinating idea. Bechlau. Anyway, point is that Rabbi Efraim Zalman writes in his sefer, one of the Nakudis, what caused him to write his Chibur Tiv Gittin is because what happens is that the people, they did it, a lot of cities, let's say this city that the Nodah B'Yehuda's Talmidim went nuts about. It could be Api Hilchos Gittin, a yid like Rabbi Efraim Zalman or Gedolim before. They could have figured out how to write the get for this city. But they didn't want to. Why didn't they want to? Because they didn't want a churva to come in Hilchos Gittin that every Yankel Beryl and Shmerel is going to say, oh, I could write a get. They wanted to keep it dafka in the hands of the Gedolim. So Efraim Zalman says that's why he did his major research, and that's why he did. And Lamaisa, this is how it became a skabel mamish b'yamav. Even before he dies, becomes the go-to sefer, and that's how we'll conclude very quickly with the rest about this. Lamashal, 1836, the Pischei Teshuva. You open up your Shulchan Aruch, he's using Rabbi Efraim Zalman. So much so that in 1863 and 5 times afterwards, it's pulled out of the Shulchan Aruch just on Hilchos Gittin with this Pischei Teshuva, which we're going to discuss in Mitzvah Shem in one of the upcoming episodes. And Chaim can ask you the significance of this chibur. Bottom line is, it's published with even a chibur of Rabbi Tzal HaKayin with this. Now, as you're a Sanzer, as you like to pride yourself being a Sanzer Einikol, we have to discuss in Hilchos Gittin. The Sanzer Rav wrote a Meirdik Chibur on Hilchos Gittin. Divrei Chaim, 1864. Part of this Chibur is built off the Beis Shmuel, and part of it is based on Ha'aris on Efraim Zalman. Lamaisa, the Ohalei Shem from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, 10 years later, 14 years later, 1878, publishes his chibur. This sefer eventually causes a pulmus because it seems the Hasidim of the Sanzers did not like some of the things that he said in there. This is a whole controversy we're not going to get into right now, due to Rachmanis. And now just to list in 2 minutes a bunch of other chiburim, so that way no one will have time, because otherwise it's going to be tiniest to me like this. Number 1, 1890, you have the Kavnoki, a tremendous Dayan Lubavitch chibur Adayim used very much. Ramart Harowitz, the Rabbi of Frankfurt, son-in-law of the Archaner, publishes in 1891 an important manuscript. The Stei Chemed puts out a massive work on Hilchos Gittin in his collection, 1891. He dies in 1905. The Aruch HaShulchan, 1905, puts out a massive work on all of Hilchos Gittin, including the names. Kedarkai, it's unbelievable to see how he goes through the sugyas, everything about him. This becomes a key work in the world of halacha. L'mashal, Sefer Zikaron recently came out, called Sefer Zikaron Pnei Moshe. In the back, they printed materials about a pulmus in Atlanta. This was just recently, Nachi Weinstein had a whole show with the person who published this whole fascinating chibur. And you see the chashivas, one of the things they're bringing is the Aruch HaShulchan just came out, and the handling had a paskin had in the Gittin controversy that erupted in Atlanta. Okay, fast forward, we have Rebellion Paisik in 1906, a sefer called Ha'azla Geirish. Okay, 1965, a chibur from Tzav Yad, the Pri Megadim, comes out. Interestingly enough, he talks about if Erev Shabbos one could write a get. We're handling if you could learn Hilchos Gittin Erev Shabbos. We're talking about it right now as the clock ticks. But Kitzer, the Nachlas Shiva has a whole discussion about it. The Stei Chemed brings that if you look at my chibur of the friend of the Dukduke, my friend the Dukduke Seifrim, he has a Ksav Yad of a get early on, and it says they wrote the get Erev Shabbos. So the Pri Megadim handles the Shaila in this chibur that's published from manuscript in 1965 by Rev Leiter. And he, after Balamayis, even though he says he shouldn't, but then he records a get that he had to do on Erev Shabbos. Anyway, we have all different kalim out there, all different svarim out there nowadays. Besides the fascinating works that Zichron Moshe has published, Harry Kedem published from the Maharshal Blin. We have Rav Moshe materials, even recently has come out from Rav Moshe, supposedly. Rav Henkin, there's materials. B'chon Eitzar Paiskim, which is his own fascinating story, which we're not going to get into, no time. And Rav Gertner put out a book on Kfiyas Haget. But Kitzer, it's endless. This topic goes on and on and on. Baruch Hashem for everyone, at least all the listeners, that I have Shabbos coming, so we can't continue. But this is the story at Amir Hashem. To end off, we're going to see the chashivas of this sefer in one of the next pulmusim that we're going to discuss how they played out even more the story.
Wow. Okay. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, but I have to just mention one last nakuda because this relates to both how me and Rabbi Shwed, how we pronounce things. And this plays out over here. Rabbi Efraim Margolis brings up how could you bring rayas from different things. So sometimes he'll say, oh, you look in this and this sefer, and he'll see how it's spelled. Okay, gewaldik. Then he says, no, maybe it's a printing mistake. A lot of times the printer printed it. You can't bring a raya that the gadol said it. That's why manuscripts is much more helpful, because it's a get, and it's, okay, fine. Now, turns out, this is not just a joke. I came across a story. It's a known story. Everyone heard it at some point. Some nusach of the story. But Kitzer Chaim Volozhin writes a letter to his daughter in a city, Lida. She lives in Lida. And her name was Chasya, I believe. Once I'm quoting something, I might as well quote it right. Her name, Chasya. The shaila was, how do you spell Chasya? Ches Samach Yud Aleph or Ches Samach Aleph? Okay. Kitzer, he wrote her a letter. How you doing? Whatever. Then he calls back the shliach. Come back, and he changes to make sure he spelled it right, and then whatever. Okay. Kitzer, turns out many years later, there was a get with a lady this name, and the Kitzer, the different nuschais of the story was like this. Why did Chaim Volozhin called him back? Because he knew that someone might end up using his letter to see how he refers to spelling his daughter of his name. This is a documented story. Interestingly enough, I start looking on the internet. Is there such a daughter of Chaim Volozhin? So here's where you have to know. Just because Wikipedia says there's no such daughter of Chaim Volozhin does not mean it's true. Baruch Hashem, 3:00 in the morning, I email a friend of mine to help. I don't have time to look into all the different topics about this. The clock is ticking to prepare this share. He finds for me 4 marmakaimis. Yes, she did exist. She was real. She's a tal. And the story, there's definitely makairis about it. Now, what's this? Why am I mentioning this story? Turns out that the Maharshal and the Maharshal was known for being very sharp, and he had his yachas of the Rama is a ganze sugya. And the point in this sugya is that one time he writes to Rama, you're not being medactic in your letters and whatever. He gives him a lot of musar in one of his chuvas, a famous chuva, Simon Vav and Simon Zayin. Kitzer, it seems like the Rama didn't spell things right and didn't say things right in the letter. And the Maharshal brings up, you have to be careful because from letters for Hilchas Gittin, people are medayik for Taifsi Gittin. So I'm always very careful, says the Maharshal. Rama says no, he wasn't. So now I'm giving a limutzchus. As I've said this many times, we're holding almost by episode 50. I say things wrong, right and left. I'm not claiming to be anything like the Rama, but in this thing, I have the Rama lismoicha. I'm not Reb Chaim Volozhiner that you have to paskin how it is, and I'm saying the fairish. You can never, ever be medayik in how I say a word. I have terrible abilities in reading and saying the names right. Now, that goes as a limutzchus for me. I'm not the Maharshal, what could I say? And it plays out in Hilchas Gittin. Obviously, you should not be seimich on how I would write names in Hilchas Gittin. Okay. Anyway, that was the B'derech Tzachos to conclude.
Okay. Wonderful and excellent. Is there anyone who has a museum where they collect Gittin? There's got to be people out there who collect Gittin throughout the generations.
I'll tell you, I can't believe that there isn't. I did check already that on auctions they do sell them. And there must be that there's someone that does this, but I didn't come across him yet. I just only got into this proud of the sugya in the past few days, so I didn't have a chance to see. But I imagine there is. If not, maybe now there will be.
I think we have to talk to Rabbi Yeshua Yankelevich. He probably would know.
I did not have a chance to call.
Okay, wonderful. Since it's almost Shabbos, I took some notes. I was trying to keep track of all the different Seforim that you mentioned. People could see my my thing over here, and I gave up like halfway through. So that's for that. Let's get to the sefer that you're pulling off the shelf. We've done quite a few of them already. We've done the Toras Adam from the Reuven Margolis. We've done Shema B'ni, which is more of a current sefer from the Rosh Hashiva and Chavetz Chaim in Miami. We've done Saviv Ohalei Shem, which has to do with the Chida. We've done Emes Liakov, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky on the first volume of Nevi'im. We've done Siach Tzvi from the Tzvi Hersh Farber. What do we have on tap today?
Okay, so today we have, it's called the Moreh Nevuchim. Moreh Nevuchim, famous, the Rambam, one of his most famous works, a new edition that comes out from Ir HaKodesh Bnei Brak, Mechon HaGoyis B'das Yisrael.
So you're getting involved with it. You could learn Moreh Nevuchim. You should learn Moreh Nevuchim. Is that today's topic?
As they say in Yiddish, ich mischich nicht da rein in these sort of Sachen. You got to ask your local paisik if you should learn it or you shouldn't learn it. And Mirz Hashem, I hope to deal with it at least as far as the Beis Medrash Hagra and the Yachas to the Moreh Nevuchim. It was much more positive than people think. But, Kitzer, this fellow is a team of people. They put out one volume. It's supposed to be 5 volumes. So, my high. The Kitzer, in the world at large right now, Moreh Nevuchim is coming back. A lot of people have been learning it. There's new editions about it. And from publishing houses have been publishing it. This is yet coming. It's distributed by one of the most from Seforim store distributors in Eretz Yisrael, Yefei Nof. It's coming out from Bnei Brak by From Yidden. I believe the main person learns in Panovich. Anyway, Bekitzer, this Moreh Nevuchim, what's the significance is, it collected many of the Mefarshim on the Moreh Nevuchim that were either a manuscript or very hard to find. It did use manuscript information. It has a Sefer Mafteach similar to the Frankel Rambam of where people handle the Rambam. And it has L'mashal Hagois of the Rama and the Levush. Unbeknownst to most people, the Rama gave shir on Moreh Nevuchim in his yeshiva. We have the Hagois in this edition. The Levush, Talmud Rama, also learned this biyun, also in here. It's a very important work if one is interested in learning Moreh Nevuchim to have with all the different parshanim. The Barbanel's parish is in here, complete edition. It seems all the earlier editions missing lots of parts. They haven't. It's going to be 5 volumes. Not going to be a cheap thing, but upon him, this is something to mention. It's brand new on the market.
Thank you. Okay, this episode was fascinating. Rabbi Brut didn't breathe much during this episode. And
the Ferris B'nai Haman. Yes. As I was cutting out the material, what could we do?
Unbelievable the amount of Seforim and ideas that were mentioned over here. And it's a fascinating topic with cities, and I'm sure there's so much to talk about. Like you brought up a drop when you get to names that are not Lashon Kodesh names. You talk about cities and rivers, and
Exactly.
it's
It's unbelievable.
it's a Mayim Shein Lahem Soif, and this is something which really works with the Messiah. This is something which has to be handed down.
Right.
Sure, Klolim and framework how to do names, and that's interesting also, right? There are certain cities and places that they don't get in there because they don't have a Messiah. They don't know how to spell the names, and they don't know which lakes are considered lakes that are around that city.
Right.
I think that was part of the Atlanta tumult, but the lake, but the river that was that part, near Atlanta, part of Atlanta.
Yes.
That was all part of it. Okay. So
Okay.
thank you very much. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and
You too.
we'll see you on the other side.